Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another set of video in which we continue to talk about the human resources module, and we've actually configured the human resource module. So now we are talking about processes. So this video will talk about the leave of absence. Just one thing to note that we haven't actually configured the leave of absence, and in this demo environment, I do not have a leave of absence configured because I would like to create and explain you the leave of absence module in more detail than what I will discuss here. So I don't want to basically glimpse over the leave of absence because it does play a role in the payroll at some point, and I want to give you just a context of how, from a process perspective, you can enroll somebody into a leave of absence. So we are obviously talking about Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. So if this is the first time you stumbled upon this video, you can always go back to some of the series that I've created. And so it's a sequential series where we have configured the system from scratch, and we have moved all the way up to the processes. And now we're going to simply talk about the leave of absence process. So once you're on this employee active form where there's a list of employees, and you would obviously have more than one employee in this case, but this is a demo environment that we're starting to create transactions and processes just for an understanding purposes. So when you have everything configured in leave of absence, which would be the module right here, we would want to assign a leave to an employee. So we want to make sure that the license piece is taken care of, because in this case, in order for you to access the list of employees, which would be all employees here in this form, you will need the right license. Not everybody can access this form. Like a team member license, for instance, cannot access this form. They can only access the employee self-service workspace and maybe some other forms here and there. But this form requires a full license. So in our case, it would be the HR manager, for instance, who would require a full license in order for them to assign a leave to an employee through this list. So that's what one of the things that you want to make sure that you also understand as a functional consultant before you start making propositions to your client. So going back to leave of absence, now we've assumed that the leave of absence module has been configured correctly based on the requirements that were given to you. What you need to do now is to assign this. So assuming that this employee was just recently hired, and we're not going to talk about data migration in that piece. That's a long story. So we're going to touch base that sometime in the future. And in that case, you would be able to assign leaves through data migration when you're making a transformation from one ERP to another. So in this case, from a process perspective, we're looking at hiring this employee, so which we have done. So this Leo is an active employee, as you could see under the list. And now we simply need to assign them a leave. So what you need to do is go under the setup called leave of absence. Once you click leave of absence, then you're into this form. So this is where you actually assign a leave. And to do that, you click new. You look at or assign them at least an enrollment start date. So this is normally the day when they were hired, because that's the time that they're going to start accruing. And it usually depends on the requirement, but that is the ideal requirement for a leave of absence when an employee gets hired and when they get enrolled in. So they should get enrolled into that plan right away, unless there's a probation period. Of course, there's different industries, different requirements. But in our case, we would assume that the enrollment date is when they were hired. So they do not have to wait for 3 months or so in order for them to be allowed to accrue vacation, for instance, right? That could be one of our plans. So in this case, enrollment is 14th. You select a plan. So because we haven't configured any leave plans as of yet, that's why you do not see any leaves here. So that we will cover down in the future. So if we've configured it correctly, we would have seen it here. We will revisit this sometime in the future when we're actually configuring leave of absence. In this case, assuming we have done it, we have configured it, you would select the leave. And the tier-based employment start date, so this comes from the configuration as well, so you can have that configured in the leave of absence module down here. Same thing with the accrual start date, so we can default that value or the date as well, and match it up to enrollment date, or we can have a different accrual start date. So there are options available for in terms of configurations. We'll talk a little bit about that later at some point. And the grant is basically the value, the balance that you would assign upon entering into this leave. So that can also be configured. So in this case, so obviously we haven't configured a plan, so there's no grant value that we're simply allowing or giving out to an employee. So the business case here would be that I get enrolled into this leave of absence plan, like called vacation, and the rule of thumb here is, or by the business, they usually give you 10 vacation days or 10 hours of vacation work days once you enroll into the plan, and then you start accruing it on top of that. So that's where the grant comes in. You can also give a manual adjustment. So if, for instance, or for whatever reason, you want to give more balance than what you have configured for this leave plan for exceptional basis, then you can obviously do that here. So as an HR manager, when you're assigning this enrollment into this particular leave plan, you can manually adjust that, and that would not compromise any of the configuration for that particular plan. It would be simply one-off for the sole purpose of assigning it to this particular employee. So once you've done that, you click OK, and then here in this form, you would see that plan show up. And you would also have a current balance accordingly. So that balance also reflects on the employee self-service workspace. So you would be able to see that balance for that employee. So at least if Leo had access to the ESS, he would be able to see the current balance of what their leave is. And for that, he can at least request time off. So he needs to go into his ESS, request the time off by clicking request time off on one of the ESS buttons, and you simply route the request to a workflow. One thing to note, you absolutely need a workflow configured in order for you to request a time off. You will not be able to configure the leave of absence without an active version of a leave of absence workflow. So you want to make sure that that's the first thing that you discuss prior to start configuring the leave of absence, because the workflow needs to be there. Otherwise, you will not be able to configure the system. So when it comes to the employee self-service workspace, then they can easily go into employee self-service workspace just to show you where that would look like. Go under workspaces, employee self-service workspace. So you always want to make sure that you can put it there to favorites, and it's easy for you to access, because a lot of people may not have access to a full license and be able to navigate into the system through human resources. So they might just have access to the ESS with a team member license. In that case, once you have that requested, you can simply approve it, or the HR manager can approve it depending on the workflow, how difficult it is, how complicated it is. It goes through a series of people to simply approve. And at that point, all you need to do is basically navigate into the system and know what the system looks like. So you can view your time off, for instance, for that particular employee. You see that there's approved time off. So there'll be a list of approved time offs. These are the time off requests. So anything that's still pending, you will get to see your balances as well as of the day 6/14. So what is the available balance, what there is a current balance, and then accrual rate and all of that. So that can be configured based on the requirement itself, so that you can see for Leo what it looks like. And in last piece is basically if you want to, delete the leave and absence plan accrual. So you could easily do that by clicking here. And of course, you can also look at the accrued leave and absence plans. So with that, I would, let you play around a little bit and have a demo data, for instance, to request a time off. So I would assume that the demo data may have a plan configured in the system, and it does have a workflow associated with it. So you can always try to request time off and see how that looks like. But from the process perspective, this is how you would assign a leave plan to an employee. And we're going to start talking about the compensation piece in our next video.